Let's talk about obsession. But one of the things that a chauvinistic culture does that is highly biased towards the masculine is that in the duality, in the polarity between the particle and the wave, between the dot and the ecological framework in which the dot resides, masculine cultures, chauvinistic cultures, focus on the dot, focus on the distinction between one thing and another, as opposed to the larger field in which they're a part. So while we're focusing on obsession as the dot, obsession does not exist in a vacuum. We might just as easily be talking about madness. How does obsession relate to madness? What is obsession? Form a definition in your own mind. And what is madness? Form a definition in your own mind. How do these two things relate? And just as we might as well be talking about madness as obsession, we might also be talking about self-destruction. The way that obsession, in its madness, can lead to an unraveling of a life, an unraveling of what we've spent years prior trying to build. So we can be looking at self-destruction. We can be looking at addiction, because what is an obsession if not an addiction? And what is an addiction in your mind? Can one be addicted to circular, repetitive thoughts? Can one be addicted to a person? Can one be addicted to an adrenaline rush? To sugar? To the thought of, I'll do anything possible to avoid feeling small and helpless? Can one be addicted to appearing a certain way, such that even when it's not rational, one clings to something that, to the outside observer, seems to tip one over the edge into unnecessary suffering? So what are some of the other things in this landscape? So we have addiction, we have compulsion, we have madness, we have self-destructive. What do these things have in common? And one of the things they have in common is cultural illiteracy. Or another way of saying that would be that you can go from cradle to grave in our culture, our cult of culture, without learning formal definitions. You see, in a culture where someone behaves compulsively, obsessively, and mom and dad walk away, and you're 5 years old, and they say, you don't want to talk with that person. They're weird. They're a little bit strange. We don't talk about her, the bag lady in the neighborhood. We don't talk about him, the person that threw it all away in an addictive spiral. We don't talk about certain things. In an obsessive culture that is obsessed with its taboos. A culture that is obsessed with taboo does not talk about its taboo. It is obsessed through the silence, through the repetitive avoidance, through the commitment to at all costs not face something head on. So one of the things that these different words have in common is that we're likely not to have a formal induction to what they mean, why they come about, where to locate them within, where to locate them on the outside, and what to do about it. Or maybe our cult is good enough at locating them on the outside. That person, there's something about them. It's the obsessive energy. So they're not doing anything particularly wrong, but they're a little bit too intense. They're a little bit too obsessive. They're a little bit something that we don't want to deal with, inside or out. And so our response in a dissociative, traumatizing, shame-based culture is to distance, to marginalize and isolate the individuals demonstrating obsessive traits, unless the obsession takes place in a culturally sanctioned domain. Now, we're looking at the cult aspects of culture, and what makes a cult at its core is irrational dogma. Because when everyone behaves in a certain way that objectively makes no sense, but is culturally normal, we can say that those people are part of a cult, applying and ingesting, infecting themselves with cult memes that make them normal and thus integrated with the cult, but at the same time mad, irrational, obsessive, and insane in a way that we can't see. Because someone who obsessively takes drugs is a bad person for reasons we will fudge the truth to explain. And someone who obsessively works or obsessively invents something is a good person, providing they do it legally, i.e., providing they go about it in the circuitous manner outlined by the cult. This is the legal way to do things. These are the things that should be done. This is the illegal way of doing things. These are the things that should not be done. If you are obsessively compulsive in the way things should be done and doing the right things, for example, if you legally drive to work in a gas-guzzling Porsche and arrive on time following the rules of the workplace and the rules of the cult, you can work 60, 70 hours a week, consuming vast quantities of natural resources, scamming people out of large amounts of money legally by convincing them through false advertising that if they just buy these unnecessary items, they will be surrounded by beautiful women, a lie, sensitive women, a lie, a clean, serene backdrop, a lie. Not only a lie, but a schizophrenic lie. Because often the very serene backdrops and beautiful women that are used to promote advertising of something that we don't need are the very things, when being produced, which pollute the environment that the backdrop in the ad promised to provide, thus rewiring the brain to seek something healthy in the exact opposite direction that they're likely to find it. You see Porsches driving along meandering roads without any traffic. And what we all want is the beautiful scenery and a life bereft of traffic. But what we get is a noisy, expensive, environmentally destructive vehicle that is hard to get into and uncomfortable, not only to ourselves, but to the environment that we're seeking to buy through the ad. As long as you do this legally, you are considered sane, productive, an upstanding member of the community. But when you are off looking for ephemeral clues of a transpersonal world, of a transcendent domain, you're a little bit crazy. So, one of the reasons we don't look too closely at obsessions is that all cults are based on a brainwashed, traumatic induction of a series of obsessions out of fear that if we violate from the status quo, if we violate from the norm, the status quo and the norm of our parents, of our school, of our employers, of our laws, of our government, that our human needs will be taken away from us by the majority that enabled them. That our ability to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, to have self-esteem, to develop our personal gifts, to bring those gifts out into the world, to experience the synergism and abundance that occurs as we do, and finally to become a part of something bigger than ourselves. That these things will be taken away from us, either inhumanely, as defined by the cult, by giving you a quick and painless death, or humanely, defined by the cult, by spending $100,000 a year of public money to lock you up in a concrete box for your own good, where you can sit and rot, bereft of the opportunity to self-actualize, as not only punishment to you, but punishment of the cult, punishing the cult that has the incompetence to think that spending its own money to hire its own people to sit guarding you in a concrete box somehow restores whatever it was you supposedly took away from the cult by stepping out of cult lines. If we step out into ecological awareness and do not get constrained with the obsession of getting to the point, a masculine dictate, we can explore the ecological landscape of obsession as it ripples into addiction, into shame, into trauma, into blame, and into pain. So let's look at some of the other areas. Grief and trauma are one of the things that tie in with compulsion. So this could also be a video called Grief and Trauma. As good chauvinists, we're desperately trying to find a point. What is the point? Which one is it? Which one? In an either-or paradigm that says if it's this, it can't be this, and if it's this, it can't be this, because we're looking through the lens of particles rather than the lens of waves. When you look through the feminine lens of the wave, it's all interconnected, it's all flowing. Your rationally trained conscious mind may not be able to keep things distinct, but who said the point was getting to the point, except a chauvinistic cult that taught us that having any sense of mystery, that embracing the truth that 99.9% of reality is unknown, and 99.9% more of reality is unknown, who gave the space for the savoring of the journey, for the enjoyment of the road, for the curiosity about mystery? Well, grief and trauma have a lot to do with obsession, because trauma shatters identity. In a psychologically illiterate culture, do we know what identity is? What is the definition of an identity? Could you write it on the palm of your hand? The definition I'm using is a pattern, a coherent pattern, a repetitive pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. So when you're trying to tell if someone is someone you know, are you Martha? You see, your hair looks a little bit like Martha. You're about the same height as Martha. We're talking about the identity of habit, the habit of height, the habit of hair color. Your voice sounds a little bit like Martha. What's that? It's a certain vibration, the habit of vibration. I kind of think there's a good chance you're Martha. And when Martha laughs, it's confirmed because it's a distinct habit of laughing. The sound wave goes up like this, reverberates like this, comes down like this. I've never heard that you're Martha. I've identified you by a habit, by a cross-section of habits. But here's the more interesting and frightening aspect of identity. How do we know who we are? Well, we have decided that we are the person who does this and says this and feels this and thinks this, often without examining the inheritance that we have cobbled together into an identity of adopted habits by other people that came before us, who used those habits to advantage. Every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to survive, has needed to survive, has needed to feel secure, feel love and belonging, etc. Now, when we watch someone with a series of habits, oh, his hat, his Homburg, right? His Homburg is always perfectly clean. There was a time when that was a desirable habit. Buying a Homburg, the first step of the obsession. Wearing the Homburg, the second step. And keeping it perfectly clean at the right angle. A habit worthy of distinction. Top hats, another habit. Having its own set of protocols. Bowing, first to royalty, then to wealthy people who, let's face it, in a capitalist cult are more important than non-wealthy people. So we have a series of habits. And if we see that the people doing those habits are surviving, feeling secure, having a sense of love and belonging more successfully than the people doing these habits, well, we're likely to change habits. We're likely to form an identity. I am the one who wakes up at 4:30 a.m. precisely. You can look at cultural habits, the British obsession with time. You listen to Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, and what distinguishes the British gentleman in the book, and it's one of the most striking aspects of the identity, is the precisely. He woke up precisely at this time. Every day, not just some days, every day. You have a cult of habits around time. The BBC World Service, at precisely the hour, the 5 dots sound. And at precisely that point, the same voice says this, and this is the identity of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Consistency, precision. In a war against mystery, in a war against spontaneity, in a war against femininity, in a war against chaos, the unknown, and mystery. So, an identity is a series of habits. I know I'm me because I'm the one who likes this necklace. Now, how do I know I'm the one who likes this necklace? Well, I wore it before. I bought it. I noted with interest that more people commented on this necklace than on any other item of my appearance. Interesting. I'm in a cult that notes necklaces. Now, what do you do when you liked a necklace, bought a necklace, and notice that more people comment on a necklace than on any other part of you? They don't say, I like your eyes. Be nice. But this cult doesn't produce people who say that. It produces people who talk about objects. Maybe it's okay to compliment women's hair, but what about mine? You see? How do I know I'm not a woman? Well, for one thing, nobody praises my hair. Look at those nice little curls there. Nobody notices. So, I become the one who wears the necklace in part because I want to be the one who is liked for something. And if this is the best that this cult can get around to doing, I'll take the necklace. So if suddenly this necklace vanishes, there has to be an explanation. Why aren't, if I'm me, and I like this, and I bought this, and I normally wear this, then where's the necklace? Maybe I'm not me. If I take it off, am I still me? What if I start speaking in Spanish? Well, I'm the one who speaks English. I don't know Spanish. So if I start speaking Spanish, it's a good indication that it's not me. I've worn turtlenecks as my primary shirt for more than 20 years. Why? Well, it's quite simple. Land's End makes a variety of interesting turtlenecks. Number one. Number two, I don't like shopping. I call them up. I say, I want some more medium tall. They say, like your last order? I say, yes. Maybe I get a little bold because they say, well, we're no longer making that color. And I say, why ever not? And they explain to me that there's no explanation. They just don't make those colors anymore. But of course, we know we're living in America, the land of the free, right? And we all know that freedom means variety and choice and newness and change. We all know that that's the thing to do. We want to be modern and sophisticated. We want to be different. We want to show that we're making progress. I know. Let's delete all Dane's favorite colors and invent new ones to show how much we are evolving with the times. Well, over the years, the thread count in the turtlenecks have gone down as a new corporation bought the old corporation. The thread count and the weight has gone down substantially. The prices have gone down. The colors have changed. Is it still a Land's End turtleneck? The fabric is different. It's a little bit more stiff than it was even 8 years ago. And when I ask about the operator, why are my turtlenecks lighter and lighter? Why are the colors changing? Why is the fabric more stiff? Why has the size that I've been ordering for 20 years suddenly got a little tighter? Is it really that I'm fat? Are these arms that different than they were 20 years ago? I haven't been lifting weights. And they acknowledge the change. But it's still Land's End. It's still called a medium tall. And I don't want to think about clothes. What's more, I like the fact that a neck prone to sore throats is always warm. It'll fit into just about anything. So I am the one who wears this shirt. How would I know it was me if I didn't? If my nose was altered, if suddenly I was speaking Spanish, the necklace is nowhere to be seen, and I'm wearing a suit, this does not seem right, does it? Because it's different. It's different. And let's go back to the more comfortable shape. I'm me again, right? This is me. This is me. And the problem with trauma is a very large force of energy, like a bowling ball in relation to a pinball, collides with our identity, collides with our habits. You see, I always arrive precisely at 6 p.m. I put my hat on the hat stand like so. I talk like thusly. I don't say these things. I never say these things for some mysterious reason called identity. And then I do these things, and everyone says, yes, that is Dane doing those things as he always does. But what happens when a fire sweeps through the village? There isn't time, though some people cling to their identities at the expense of their lives, to say, Madam, this was the finest evening I have ever experienced. No, there's a mad panic. Why? A large mass of energy is descending on a small mass of energy, threatening to obliterate the pattern. An electromagnetic storm of big enough proportions will wipe every magnetic tape on the planet, destroying the identity of the musicians who made the songs on the tape. Large enough heat will burn the books, destroying the identity of the authors and the distinct words contained in that book. Trauma is a large energy pattern colliding violently with a small energy pattern that shatters the identity of the smaller energy pattern. It erodes the pattern. And this creates grief. Grief at the loss of self. Because am I not the one who bought this necklace? So who am I now that it has been stolen? Am I not the one who feels this way day after day? So who am I now after a traumatic event erased and obliterated, wiped those feelings off the map for so long that I cannot remember who I was, let alone embody that in a pattern that says, I know who I am the one that does this, that feels this, that says this, that does that. How can I compose myself, my identity, when it has been obliterated by forces beyond my control, bigger than I can absorb and maintain the integrity of my pattern? You see, an electromagnetic pulse can knock out a city if it's a strong enough pulse, disrupting the pulse of electricity that was there before, maintaining the identity of the status quo. What do you do when you are no longer there? When everything you knew to be you is gone? The speech patterns, the thought patterns, the emotional patterns, the physiological patterns. What do you do when you were the one who was always offering to help? And a grenade blew off both of your arms. The thought is still there. The feeling is still there. But even if you say, how can I help? Because I'm the one who says that. What do you do when the person looks at you with pity rather than gratitude? In a cult that shames those who are pitied, that's the cult identity, and says, no, thank you. And you realize what a fool you are, because you have no arms to help with. You've lost your identity, and you wanted to be that. You aspired to be this one that did these things, that said these things, but you encountered a larger energy. And the law of mass says that when a pinball collides with a bowling ball, the pinball goes flying, and the bowling ball continues on its original trajectory. When Icarus did battle with the sun, his wings melted and he fell to the ground. When a larger energy pattern collides with a smaller energy pattern, the larger energy pattern destroys the identity of the smaller energy pattern in some way. When a bowling ball collides with a pinball, the identity of direction and empowerment is destroyed. The identity of the steel ball is not destroyed. It takes greater heat. But if that pinball is subjected to 4,000 degree temperature, as the bowling ball passes through its trajectory, it liquefies and splatters, potentially eating in to the bowling ball, which cannot withstand 4,000 degree heat. They may even become one. As the liquid pinball at 4,000 degrees encounters the plastic bowling ball that cannot withstand the heat, in which case a trauma to both occurs. Trauma is a violent death of identity. It is not the end of existence. Physicists say that no energy is created or destroyed, it's only transformed. Trauma is a violent shattering of identity. And if you do not know who you are, if you cannot find yourself, and you find that what is left in the helplessness, in the confusion, in the uncertainty, in the pain, and perhaps shame and fear, is not welcome, is not recognized, is not honored, you not only have the trauma of a shattered identity, you have the grief of missing, of losing who you once were. But what do you do if you're born into a cult or culture that does not know how to grieve? That has not read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross books? Or if it has read those books in pockets here and there, does not have the sophistication to differentiate between head knowledge and biological knowledge. Because there's a big difference between being able to rattle off the 5 stages of grief, or the 10 stages, or the 20 stages, depending on how many distinctions you want to make on a continuum. that involves letting go of who we were and finding a new identity, cohering into a new pattern that has a home, at least in our own hearts. Because if the new identity we form, if the new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing is a pattern that we hate, as an internalization of the hatred towards that pattern by the cult around us, it is a psychological fact in a psychologically illiterate cult that the parts of ourselves that we hate are the parts of ourselves that no one in our culture can love. No one in our family, no one in our marriage, no one in here can love. Weighed down by the inevitable fact that that which cannot be understood, loved, healed, protected, and welcomed by the cult around us is a threat to our own survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem. What do you do if you have been so unfairly treated that you feel helpless, lonely, despondent, and self-pity? Now, if you understand the science of feelings, the same way you understand the science of mixing paint, you understand that when you mix a little bit of this blue with this red, with this green, with this brown, with this yellow, in a bit of white paint base and shake it up, you understand that you get black because you're a paint mixer in a cult that understands mixing paint to some degree. If you don't want a black color, you have to delete some of the colors in the mix that created the black color. In an emotionally illiterate cult, we do not understand the same thing, the same principle about feelings. If you don't like the helplessness, the self-pity, the hurt, the rage, the hate that is refracted through the scientific instrument of the human heart, linked innately to the biology that is designed to tell us whether we're in a friendly environment or a sociopathic environment. If you don't like the colors that dial up on the instrument of the heart, you may have to reduce some of the cruelty, some of the stupidity, some of the sociopathic, some of the barbaric, some of the shame that is enabled in an abuse cult designed to kill off and dissociate the conscious mind from the heart mind, from the body mind, that might dissuade it from going into war. In a military environment, self-pity is hated. The sense of injustice is hated. Hate is tolerated, but it is directed and projected not at the sociopathic president that's making up excuses for war to boost their electoral ratings at the expense of millions of lives based on lies That hatred has to be directed out there at Saddam Hussein, someone who's not affecting your marriage or your family. No, what affects your marriage and your family is coming home in a body bag or with PTSD, a trauma so severe that you find yourself beating the shit out of your children and not knowing why, because you can't get back to the identity that was lost in ungrieved, unmourned terror overseas, watching one friend after another be blown up, supposedly by the enemy out there, but really by the enemy we elected as president to put American lives at risk. American, another identity. Those of us who talk like this, who have an accent like this, who like to make money like this, who like to debate highly emotional topics and call them interesting, who like to send their children to school not to learn how to drive, not to learn how to start a business, not to learn how to vote, not to learn how to open a bank account, not to learn how to build a house, not to learn how to differentiate spousal abuse from healthy conflict and report it, not to stop the beatings and the incest at home, not to learn how to build healthy, long-term win-win friendships, not to learn how to sell in a capitalist cult, not to learn to repair your marriage or how to grow a garden or how to protect your environment. Because all of these things would be intelligent to learn. Instead, the identity of a modern American education system is one of dissociating children from the natural environment in which they will be initiated to learn about the world by separating from it in such a contrived manner that by the time they emerge at age 18, or if the system hangs on to them for a few more years, racking up college debt, that whenever they emerge, they have little or no way to use those skills to create well-being in their community. That's what it means to be an American. But no one's going to change our way of life. Why? In part because we don't know how to grieve the loss of ourselves. To change an identity is to die and to be reborn. So we have birth, death, and identity as part of obsession. We have sociopathic cultures as part of obsession. What's the connection between obsession in the individual and the sociopathic template on the part of the group? The geometry and mathematics are clear, but are they clear in our mind, raised as we are in this cult? A cult that can take you cradle to grave without any psychological literacy? Is the mathematics clear? Is the mathematics clear that when 5% unemployment becomes 10% in unemployment, there are X millions of women who are going to be lashed out at. Physically, sexually, verbally, emotionally, spiritually. Do we understand the mathematics that connects the loss of identity? Because how do you say, I am the one who is working? I go to work, I punch in like this, I do this, I do this, I do this, I come home and I get a paycheck, and that's me. How do I maintain that identity when I'm sitting at home feeling worthless? In a cult that tells me I am worthless if I'm not working and making money. I don't maintain that identity, and how do I grieve the loss of that identity in a cult that doesn't model grieving and tells me that men don't have feelings? I don't grieve very well. So maybe I start drinking a few more beers, smoking a few more cigarettes. And when I notice that I can't stop and feel helplessly trapped in an addictive identity, and my wife comes out and says, honey, could you try a little bit harder? We're running out of money. How can I maintain the identity of an unemotional man when this triggers so many feelings and so much helplessness because I don't know what to do with them? How do I communicate that I need this situation to stop? I need you to stop saying this. I need you to stop reminding me of the identity that I'm stuck in that I hate. Maybe if I punch you in the face, you'll get the message without me having to open my mouth and say things that my cult did not teach me how to say. And although it didn't teach you how to listen, and although it didn't teach you how to intuit, and although it didn't teach you how to empathize or lift my shame, the shame that you give me, following cult dictates again and again, the man is supposed to make the money. Maybe a little bit of that violence that's coming this way and now going this way will sink in, and you'll get the message. It's too dangerous to talk in this house. And we can retreat from the identity of a house in which I feel helpless about what's going to be said next into the identity of a house that is silent, sullen, and filled with hate. This is the deterioration of identity in a cult that doesn't know how to grieve, does not know how to create new identities, does not know how to shepherd its people from one traumatic event to another. And sometimes the pain is too big. Sometimes the shame is too loud. And I don't want to see it all day after day after day after day after day in an endless tapestry that feels like an eternity. I want an obsession. I want a diversion. I want a pattern of energy that goes round and round and round that I have control over. Maybe it's porn. Maybe it's violence. Maybe it's taking the car out of the road and driving a little too fast and flipping off the officer that tries to pull me over. I'm a man, right? An American. I'm supposed to be free. I'm not free in my house. I'm not free in my bank. I'm not free in my marriage. I'm not free on my own fucking roads. And you son of a bitch have the audacity to use my tax money to pull me over on my own streets. Ugh. A swing at the officer, a short time in jail. What does our cult have as the solution to this downward spiral? One thing after another, that it does not prevent, that it has not taught us how to deal with, that it has not taught others how to empathize with, that it has not taught us how to talk about, and it's too heavy to pull out of. A pinball, a bowling ball, colliding, shattering, spun off, at odds with the identity that we should be controlling our lives in the midst of a raging fire that washes through them faster than we can figure out what it was we were supposedly supposed to do to be autonomous, to be an isolated individual in an ecology in which we are intimately and intricately connected.